Smile, you're on camera. Oh, you have a good inside there?
I'll work on it.
Thank you. Okay, and then my notes are on my computer. So.
Which one's going first? The s'mores?
The death penalty one, because then we'll
Let's get the
start.
pressing out of the way.
Yep, and then we'll start with the s'mores, and I'll make s'mores.
How long is this?
8 minutes.
No, 8 minutes of my life, I can't get back.
Each? 7.
I'm being optimistic.
Give me a little bit.
Cookies are those? Chocolate chip peanut butter.
Delicious is what they are.
Are they good? Alright. You guys ready? It's a really wonderful speech. Are there crimes awful enough to sentence a person to death? Crimes of rape, torture, treason, kidnapping, murder, larceny, and perjury certainly deserve some kind of punishment, but how much is enough? Life without parole is a very viable and manageable way to handle a decreased acceptance of the outdated death penalty. Is the death penalty really constitutional, and does the state have the right to take away a life? I would like to point out some important court cases that shape the death penalty as it is today, and then take a look at the punishment of life without parole. In the 1960s, changes and challenges to the fundamental legality of the death penalty came around. Prior to this time, the 5th, 8th, and 14th Amendments were interpreted as permitting the death penalty. However, in the early 60s, it was suggested that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment, making it unconstitutional by the 8th Amendment. Later in the 60s, the Supreme Court began fine-tuning the way the death penalty was administered. Some important cases brought around this fine-tuning. They include U.S. v. Jackson in the late 60s, where the Supreme Court heard arguments regarding a provision of the federal kidnapping statute requiring that the death penalty be imposed upon the recommendation of a jury. The court held that this practice was unconstitutional because it encouraged defendants to waive their right to a jury trial to ensure that they would not receive a death sentence. The other case took place in 1968 and is called Witherspoon v. Illinois. In this case, the Supreme Court held that a potential juror's reservations about the death penalty were insufficient grounds to prevent that person from serving on the jury in a death penalty case. These jurors could only be disqualified if prosecutors could show that the juror's attitude toward capital punishment would prevent him or her from making an impartial decision about the punishment. A landmark case in this issue is Furman v. Georgia, which took place later in 1972. Furman argued that the capital cases resulted in arbitrary sentencing. With this decision, the Supreme Court then set the standard that punishment would be cruel and unusual if it was too severe for the crime, if it was arbitrary, if it offended society's sense of justice, or if it was not more effective than a less severe punishment. With the Furman case, it was decided that the specific death penalty statutes were unconstitutional, therefore opening the door for the states to rewrite their own death penalty statutes. Fast forward then to 1982, when in Texas, Charles Brooks became the first person executed by lethal injection. A viable option for the death penalty has recently gained popularity in the courts and with the public, which is life without parole. Execution rates have been declining and public support for the death penalty falling, while the Supreme Court and lower court intervention to halt executions is increasing. The Harvard Law Review gives 2 reasons for this change. The first being the innocence movement, or the possibility that the criminal is actually innocent. A prosecuting attorney for Clark County, Indiana, Stephen D. Stewart, has said, "No system of justice can produce results which are 100% certain all of the time. Mistakes will be made in any system, which relies upon human testimony for proof. Our system of justice demands a higher standard for death penalty cases. In cases where there is no doubt in a criminal's guilt, the death penalty may seem like a no-brainer. But consider the words of Raymond Scrofe, a priest and professor at St. Peter's College. Retribution is just another word for revenge, and the desire for revenge is one of the lowest human emotions. Perhaps sometimes understandable, but not really a rational response to a critical situation. To kill the person who has killed someone close to you is simply to continue the cycle of violence, which ultimately destroys the avenger as well as the offender. Former U.S. Senator Russ Feingold introduced the National Death Penalty Moratorium Act of 2000, saying, "Since the reinstatement of the modern death penalty, 87 people have been freed from death row because they were later proven innocent. This is a demonstrated error rate of 1 innocent person for every 7 persons executed." The second reason that the Harvard Law Review gives for the shift in the view of the death penalty is an alternative penalty, life without parole. This second option removes the act of what some people call playing God. According to Brian Stevenson, a professor of law at the New York University School of Law, says ultimately the moral question surrounding capital punishment in America has less to do with whether those convicted of violent crime deserve to die than with whether state and federal governments deserve to kill those whom it has imprisoned. Today, 58 countries in the world retain the death penalty, including China, Iran, the United States, and Vietnam. Each year since 1997, the United Nations Commission on Human Rights has passed a resolution calling on countries that have not abolished the death penalty to establish a moratorium on executions. Life without parole is obviously the punishment that will eventually replace the death penalty in our courts. It is also the best way to deal with the worst of crimes that are committed today.
Bravo.
Thank you.
I didn't know if you wanted to turn it off first.
Watching James Bond.
I thought that was a fun one to do after Aurora
How do I
shootings. So.
You hit that button.
Yeah.
I did.
He was the
No, just-
Joker? No.
Thought they might be utilizing it on you since they didn't know that's what they were coming for.